a sleeveless grey pullover tucked into his trousers. He stood and came across the kitchen to shake my hand, bending slightly from the waist in an odd little bow. Not serious, perhaps intended to make me smile, although he didn't smile himself. "It's all finished," he said, not to me, though he didn't take his eyes off me. "I thought to do it this morning, when you were standing for so long at the door." And that was how I learnt my uncle was a foreigner. He wasn't stern at all, I found out later, once I came to know him. He liked listening to the radio, when he could get away from the bar, listening to classical music and working in the cellar, where he would stay for hours, in a small room with a neon strip light at the far end beyond the kegs and crates of bottles. Aunt Margot said that kind of music was for people who didn't have anything better to do with their time, although she spent most mornings sitting at the kitchen table with the radio on, thumbing through magazines, in a dressing gown and her backless slippers. Uncle Joey never answered when she made comments like that. He just went pale and muttered something in his own language, Polish, which none of us understood. When Uncle Joey spoke English, you could see him concentrate to avoid making mistakes, even though his English was almost perfect, apart from his accent and its studied, over-careful quality. Sometimes he would use expressions he had heard on the radio, catchphrases, and customers would look at him for a moment, wondering if he was pulling their legs. He hated people to know he was foreign, and that he had been forced to run away from the place where he was born. But as soon as he opened his mouth, it was obvious he had come from somewhere else. I know what refugees are like now. I have lived with refugees, and anyone who knew then what I know now would have understood at once that he was a refugee, with that way of being both grateful and resentful. Grateful they have been taken in by others, resentful because they have no choice other than to be saved. I think he understood I was a refugee as well, on the run from what had happened between my parents, and what I had seen and imagined and how it had all come to an end, although I didn't speak about that. Whenever my aunt was unpleasant to me, as she often was, or when I was teased by her son, my cousin Nicholas, my uncle would listen, biting his bottom lip, before stepping in to protect me with a warning word. A few years later, Joseph said that I could make my life whatever I wanted, but I didn't believe him. I thought he was simply repeating words that other people had said to him, words of consolation. I sometimes think most consolation comes to that, repeating things we know are unlikely to be true, and will almost certainly never be true for us, because otherwise everything we have lived through will be meaningless. 2. That first night, my aunt said my bed wasn't aired properly. I'd have to sleep in my cousin's room on a camp bed. I was still wearing the vest and knickers I'd had on when I was taken away from my home. I hadn't unpacked my suitcase because I didn't know where to put my things. I didn't even know what was in it, whether my pyjamas were there or not, because it had been packed for me by the woman who'd brought me to the Mermaid. While we were waiting for the car, she told me she'd chosen the clothes she'd thought would be most suitable, although she never said for what. For an orphan, I suppose. "You can go back later and get anything else you need," she told me when she put the case into the back of the car, and I hadn't said I would rather do without everything than go back into my house. I hadn't said either that it wasn't my case at all, but one my mother had used for shoes when we went on holiday. I had nodded and looked away. That first night, Nicholas, my cousin, told me about the Mermaid. His bed was higher than mine, and all I could see was the shape of his head and the outline of a shoulder as he leant over. He told me the story in a silly, creepy voice that frightened me, despite the noise from the pub downstairs and the light from the landing. The Mermaid was the ghost of a witch, he said, who lived in the pub when it was still a house, hundreds of years ago, on her own, with a cat. She'd been drowned in a pond nearby, accused of stealing 2 children, twins, and boiling them to make soap. To make sure she was a witch, they'd taken her to the pool and strapped her to a ducking stool. I didn't know what that was. Nicholas had to explain. And if she survived, he said, it would be taken as proof that she really was a witch, and she would be taken away and burnt. But the woman who had lived in the house couldn't have been a witch, because when the ducking stool came out of the water, she was dead. And it was too late to do anything about it then, Nicholas said.